may I have your attention? Please welcome co-founder and CEO of Nominal, Cameron McCord.
Good morning and welcome to TechCrunch Disrupt 2023. Hello, my name is Cameron McCord and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Nominal, a software company building a modern data platform for complex hardware development, validation, and monitoring. Why am I lucky enough to serve as your host today? Well, I've spent the last 10 years operating at the nexus of defense, startups, and venture capital. This is my passion. Prior to Nominal, I was the head of defense at a company called Saildrone, a leading maritime autonomy company, and a product manager at Anduril Industries, where I worked on their counter unmanned aerial system product. I've also spent time on the venture team at Lux Capital, focused on the intersections of emerging technology, venture capital, and national security. And perhaps more uniquely, I've operated on the other side. I served as a congressional liaison for the Navy, working with the House Armed Services Committee and the Subcommittee on Intelligence, Emerging Threats, and Capabilities, and I helped write a 2020 Future of Defense Task Force report. But perhaps what I'm most proud of is the 6 years I spent and more than 450 days underwater as a submarine officer. So yes, this is my happy place here at Disrupt, talking about these issues with these people on this stage. To kick off this year's Disrupt, TechCrunch just joined forces with Aerospace Corporation to bring you up close and personal to the latest and greatest. Our agenda today covers a lot of parsecs: the role of US public and private partnerships, venture capital's complicated relationship with the Department of Defense, quantum, espionage, AI, warfare, and startup companies that are transforming the face of the space industry. Space tech, while one of the most complex and costly endeavors, provides enormous opportunity to advance humankind. But this new space age comes with a host of challenges and many uncertainties. And we'll have some of the most knowledgeable leaders join us today to help us unpack both of those. Don't worry about taking notes during the event. Otter.ai has you covered. Attendees can access Otter's automated real-time notes during or after via web or mobile. There's signage right at the entrance with an easy-to-use QR code. Get ready for an out-of-this-world day. The most exciting time in space, how we got here, and what comes next. This unprecedented time in space offers untold possibilities to transform humankind's relationship with the cosmos and benefit the prosperity and security of all of those here on Earth. Join leading experts as they explore what's new and what's next in space, from the mega trends and cutting-edge technologies that will define the next decade to the critical role that commercial companies will play in making the most of this very exciting time. Please welcome to the stage Steve Isakowitz, President of Aerospace Corporation, Brian Whedon, Director of Program Planning, Secure World Foundation, and Peter Wegner, the CSO of Black Sky, joined by our moderator, Susan Carlin, space science journalist and frequent contributor to Fast Company. Please give them a round of applause.
Half the world doesn't have access to the internet. That's 4 billion people globally still on the wrong side of the digital divide. But a revolution is taking place. Internet beamed down from the skies and space is coming. Affordable, super fast, and ultra secure. And available in places where up to now internet connectivity has been unthinkable. The biggest tech companies in the world are building communication networks of interconnected satellites in space to reach the most far-flung corners of the world. Laser communication allows them to exchange data at ultra-high speeds and over vast distances. It delivers crisis connectivity to disaster areas and ensures ultra-secure communication of key data. And it delivers high-speed broadband internet coverage to anywhere on Earth. Mynaric designs, manufactures, and distributes these game-changing products.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for coming, my bright-eyed, bushy-tailed audience, proving it's never too early for talking about space. I am your very caffeinated host, Sue Carlin, and I write a lot about the new space economy for Fast Company and others, and I will be your guide through this very exciting conversation. Welcome to the new Wild West. The last decade has seen a seismic shift in space as private industry and multiple nations have entered the game with robust investments and novel technologies. That would probably be you guys. But the skyward stampede will bring new challenges in managing crowding, competition, and control. So what opportunities will this new landscape offer folks like you, the entrepreneurs and investors? Well, we just happen to have some very impressive insiders who will give you some insight. First up, Steve Isakowitz, President and CEO of the Aerospace Corporation, a federally funded leading R&D center for the nation's space programs. He knows all the secrets. There he guides a workforce in solving the hardest problems in space, from outpacing national security threats to nurturing innovation in space commercialization and exploration. His 3-decade career has spanned government, commercial, and civil arenas, including prominent roles at Virgin Galactic, NASA, the U.S. Department of Energy, and the White House Office of Management and Budget. Give it up for Steve Isakowitz. I have to tell you, if I go to the bank and the dry cleaners in the same day, I need a nap, so I'm very impressed. No less impressive is Dr. Brian Whedon, in the middle, who is Director of Program Planning for the Secure World Foundation, which works across sectors towards secure, sustainable, beneficial, and peaceful uses of space. You should have worn tie-dye for this. He is an internationally recognized and widely published policy expert in space debris, situational awareness, traffic management, asset protection, and space governance. Before joining Secure World, he served in Air Force space and intercontinental ballistic missile operations. So that's quite a pivot.
Definitely a big change.
So Brian Whedon, everybody. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Peter Wegner has helped pioneer space technology for more than 30 years. Now Chief Strategy Officer of Black Sky, he leads the development of a world-class, multi-sensor geospatial intelligence engine. I said that on 1 cup of coffee. Are you impressed? Before that, he directed new technology investments at Utah State University's Space Dynamics Laboratory and new space systems at the Department of Defense. He also served as a technical advisor to the Air Force. Peter Wegner, everybody. All right, for the first part of this chat, we're going to talk a little bit about how the landscape has changed over the last years. Steve, you're going to help set the stage. What's the difference in space today than 5 or 10 years ago, and what's been driving that change?
All right, first, Sue, thank you, and TechCrunch for the opportunity. I guess I'll start with a question for the audience. If you had the opportunity to go into space, who would go? All right, it's a pretty big crowd. Well, That's what's changed in space over the last 5 and 10 years. If anybody wants to go, you can go in space today. You know, there's Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin that are providing opportunities for anybody who wants to go to become an astronaut and experience space, or if you want to go in a SpaceX vehicle, you can go into orbit. Now, what has enabled this? First of all, the economics of getting into space. The cost of the launch has gone down by a factor of 10x. The capabilities of the satellites we build have been miniaturized, and they're into high production. It used to be if you wanted to get in this business, you know, yeah, you go out, raise $100 million, and you too could be in the space business. But today, you could be a college student and build these small CubeSats that I could hold in my hand and put something into space. That's revolutionary. Also, I'd say that for the first time, maybe in the history of the space program, everything is changing. It used to be about NASA and civil space, the Apollo program in the early days, but now we're seeing not only NASA trying to go back to the moon and onto Mars and build a Webb telescope and take advantage of that, but you get in national security, completely rethinking what we're building, and not just trying to build the big exquisite satellites we've seen in the past, but to really tap into the commercial side. And then the commercial side is perhaps the most interesting part, which has really happened in the last 5 or 10 years. There really was no major commercial industry before. There was a few big companies, and again, you had to raise lots of dollars. But now we see whether it's Wall Street or Silicon Valley, people are investing, getting returns, and companies are doing quite well. And in fact, they're outpacing the government for the first time in the history of our space program. That's what's changed.
Okay, and then extrapolate that to where next? Are you going to see commercial companies overtake government companies?
Well, we are seeing that already. We're seeing that the government is finding ways to try to work with commercial entities. You know, I find it interesting that probably in the next 5 to 10 years, there's probably going to be more satellites put in space in the next 5 to 10 years than in the history of the space program. That is really transformative.
Wow, and so Peter, what are these changes portending for commercial space companies?
Well, I think Steve laid this out really well. And when I think back to my time in this industry, when I started, I was on the government side. I spent 20 years inside the US Air Force. And we built all of our own satellite systems. I remember SATCOM. That was a massive set of programs that we inside the government developed and ran. And now I think 80% of our SATCOM services are bought commercially. And we don't even really talk about that, but when you look back and you realize how much that changed, it really shows you how much more is going to change in the next 10 years. And so I think the opportunities are limitless. There are opportunities in Earth remote sensing, the business that we're in, but there are opportunities in domains that many of us, you know, I think probably people in the audience think about every day, but most Americans don't. Space tourism, space manufacturing, space transportation, all these things are going to start rolling out in the next decade.
So with the proliferation of these companies, how are they going to get traction in this new terrain? Like, how are they going to break through the noise?
Well, I think we're 2 years on the other side of what I kind of refer to as the SPAC boom of the first generation of public SPAC space companies. And I think that really opened the door for a lot of companies to kind of start going through there. It's paved the path. It shows here's how you can go from venture capital investment all the way through to a public enterprise. And many of those companies are starting to hit the point where they're revenue positive and generating, you know, profits that feed back into the business. So that cycle then just starts accelerating. And I think that's the way these new space companies are just going to accelerate even faster through it than we did.
So all of this sounds like space is going to get very crowded very quickly. And Brian, this is your terrain. How do we manage that growth while allowing for new entrants?
I mean, that is the massive policy question that not only the US government, but lots of other governments are struggling with. You can imagine, you know, Steve talked about the rapid growth in the number of satellites. We're going from, 1,000, 1,200 to at the moment 5,500 satellites, and very soon 10,000 and maybe tens of thousands. Imagine doubling or 10xing the traffic around San Francisco and not changing the infrastructure or the traffic light system, what that would do. Now, space is still pretty big, right? There's still a lot of room up there, but a lot of these satellites are going into similar areas or similar altitudes and having to operate in conjunction with not only their own constellation, but everybody else's stuff. And, oh, by the way, there's tens of thousands of pieces of junk up there, ranging from the size of a bus to softballs and smaller, that we've been putting up there for the last 50 years. So how do you do all that? And you can't manage the junk, right? The junk is just going around and around, and it is where it is. So there's a lot of debates going on, again, at the national level as well as internationally, about how do you manage this. And oh, by the way, I just mentioned only the physical congestion. There's an entire other question about the radio frequency congestion, because all of these satellites are communicating using the same frequencies or similar frequencies with stuff we're using here terrestrially. So how do you manage all that? It's a huge challenge.
Wow, the frequency point I didn't even think about. So now that gives you a lay of the current landscape, we're going to move into the near future. So we're going to look ahead about 10 years at some of the opportunities and also the challenges. The first is the rising government and commercial collaborations that are going on. Peter Blacksky has a number of government contracts. So how do startups navigate the world of government, and what should they know about the interaction with government agencies to when they're working with them?
30 seconds or less.
Yeah, 30 seconds. Is it the Anna Karenina principle that all happy families are alike and all dysfunctional families are different in their own unique ways? I think governments are that way. I think, first, there is tremendous opportunity in the government sector around the world. I would say not just the US, but globally. The war in Ukraine has showed on a public stage the power of commercial space capabilities to support security and defense needs for governments all over the world. And that is really creating new opportunities, but every government is a little bit different in the way they operate, in the way that they seek to partner with commercial companies. And that's also very different than most commercial enterprises. So it really takes unique, tailored focus on each government, what their needs are, how they want to do business, and aligning yourself to be a really good partner for them. You have to meet them where they are. They're not going to meet you, where you want them to be.
So you have to be prepared to pivot if their needs change and
really
acquiesce
understand,
to their culture.
really understand. Seek to understand the 5 questions why do you want to do this, because then you get to really the heart of the problem that they have, and allows you then to really try to align a solution to that problem.
And can you say where the most opportunity will be?
I wish. I think, Black Sky, we're very focused right now in this global security environment, and I think there's a tremendous opportunity there. I have a little bit of blinders on because I live that every day, but I think there's massive opportunities growing in other sectors that we don't play in. I'm very fascinated by in-space tourism, in-space manufacturing. I think those are really exciting opportunities.
And Steve, do you see any additional opportunities that haven't been mentioned yet? And where can companies learn more about those opportunities for partnerships? Is there a secret database?
There's no secret database. But look, I would argue that commercial space has a superpower that the federal government's very interested in, and that is the willingness to take greater risks, which means greater innovation, also means moving faster. It used to be a time when we used to build things in space. We'd say, yeah, we'll build it. It'll take 5 or 10 years. We'll deploy it. It'll be operating over the next 3 decades. That's not true anymore. The pace of technology is just moving so incredibly fast that new generations of satellites and capabilities need to be deployed every 3 to 5 years. Software needs to be updated every year, if not earlier. Cyber protections have to go up, weekly, if not daily. So the government recognizes this. So the government actually is looking for ways for industry to speak with the government. So before the government sets requirements that inadvertently knocks out innovative ideas, that they have those kind of conversations up front in terms of what's being built. Similarly with regards, as Brian mentioned, with regards to regulations. Regulations is a great enabler, and the government needs that kind of feedback. So there are opportunities. My company has something called Commercial Space Futures, where we actually try to be an intermediary with the government and industry to allow new companies to be able to talk about what they do and for us to help build bridges to get them there.
I can't believe you've actually gotten the government to rev up. That's amazing. Maybe there is hope.
Yeah, but I'll just say, Peter said it, the war in Ukraine was incredibly eye-opening. I think a lot of people sort of poo-pooed maybe commercial space capabilities, but we have seen firsthand what like Starlink has been able to do and other commercial entities like Maxar and so on in terms of pictures from space. That has really been a very eye-opening opportunity.
Okay, for good and ill?
No, for good.
Okay.
No, for good. I think it's brought a lot of transparency to the world. So when you get, Russia amassing troops on the border and they're denying they're doing anything ill, it's on the front page of the New York Times. It's just not true.
Got it.
I would just like to reinforce that. I mean, we really believe this at Black Sky, that evil cannot hide in the light. And shining light on these things that are happening is really very powerful, and it is a global good.
Okay. Brian, I want to talk about the new moon race with you. India recently placed a lander on the moon. Japan just launched one. We're going to launch the first commercial lander in November, hopefully. And human presence on the moon is not far behind. I'm expecting to see a Starbucks there soon and golden arches.
That might take a little bit longer.
Lunar latte.
Oh, I like that. I like that.
You just gave an idea to someone here.
That's right. What can we expect from the new moon race, and particularly competition for lunar resources? And also, what steps can we take now to ensure sustainable development there?
Yeah, the moon's super hot right now. I mean, it's not. It's cold, it's lifeless, there's no air, but everyone's interested in it. And it's really fascinating for those who've been around a while in the space industry. At least here in the United States, we had this mentality for a while, been there, done that, not a real big deal. Well, it turns out nobody else got a chance to go there. And now there's a ton of excitement. And it's not just coming from the United States with the Artemis program, it's coming from a whole lot of different countries, and it's coming from the commercial sector. So as she mentioned, there are something on the order of 130, 140 planned lunar missions. That includes mostly robots and rovers and satellites, but some human spaceflight as well, being done by a couple dozen different countries and a bunch of companies. Now, one thing to keep in mind, it's still hard to soft land on the moon. That is still very technically challenging. India attempted it a couple years ago with Chandrayaan-2. Unfortunately, didn't make it. There was an Israeli commercial company, SpaceIL, didn't quite make it. There was a Japanese commercial company earlier this year, didn't make it. But then the Indians made it with Chandrayaan-3 just a few weeks ago, and there's plans to go back. So it's hard, but there's a lot of interest and a lot of things coming. There's a lot of uncertainty about what it is we're going to find. We think there's a decent amount of water on the moon. Why is that important? Water is not only used to keep people alive, but it's rocket fuel. You can turn it into rocket fuel, which means you can go to other places without having to take all that fuel with you, and that is a huge deal when it comes to the rocket equation and orbital mechanics. But we're not quite sure how much, we're not quite sure where it is, we're not quite sure how hard it's going to be to get to. There may be other things out there on the moon that we discover. So there's a lot of people assuming or hoping or thinking there's going to be stuff there, and we're going to go find out what it's like. So how it's going to end up, we're not really sure.
Fueling stations next to the Starbucks.
I mean, that only makes sense.
We're already redecorating the moon, so we're good.
The challenge is we have a pretty broad set of international laws on how to do all this. Space is not quite a Wild West, unfortunately. We have treaties, we have laws, but they're all up here. What we don't have is the middle layer that interprets how those apply to specific things. If I land in one lunar crater and Peter lands next to me and we both want to go access the same block of ice, how do we do that? How does that sort out? That middle layer is missing. There are governments working on that, but that's really the big issue when it comes to sustainability. And by the way, how do we coordinate some of the safety issues? So it turns out dust is a huge problem on the moon. And if somebody lands a rocket next to me, there's probably going to be dust all over my lunar base, and it may have huge impacts for things I'm trying to do. How do we deconflict that? That is an unanswered question.
Oh, wow. That almost sounds like a reality show, like Nasty Neighbors on the Moon. There's another idea.
You're welcome.
So artificial intelligence, which is this year's buzzwords and our future overlords, I want to talk about some of the unique applications in space. So Peter, how is Black Sky using AI now, and how might you apply it in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly powerful tool that we use today to exploit virtually every satellite image that we collect. We're collecting several thousand images a day. If I had to hire humans to do that and look through every image, and they couldn't do it at the scale and the speed that we can do that with AI. So we are training AI models today on a number of objects that we detect automatically. We've deployed commercially now algorithms that detect every airplane, every ship, buildings, roads, those kind of things in every image. And what that allows us to do then is to deliver to our customers an integrated intelligence product. So no longer are they just getting the imagery, they're getting a deep stack of intelligence about what has happened in that scene, patterns of life over a period of time. All of that is done without a human in the loop. So it's incredibly powerful, it's incredibly scalable. Where that's going to go in the future is integrating more and more types of data and sensor feeds into that will really give us a picture of what's happening anywhere on the planet in near real time, in deep stack. I like to think about it like the human sensors of hearing, taste, touch, sight, smell. We want to build that kind of sensor network about what's happening on our planet, and using AI systems to pull all that information out and provide that deep stack of knowledge to the humans that live here.
Okay. And Brian, what are the policies that need to be in place to enable those types of, that type of progress?
Policies around AI is a huge question to begin with, right? What's interesting is that kind of application of machine learning and AI is becoming pretty ubiquitous and is relatively safe from a policy perspective. Something a little more challenging is I'm operating a constellation of, let's call it 5,000 satellites, and they're autonomously detecting when they come close to somebody else and maneuvering out of the way, and it's working. Steve is also operating a constellation of 5,000 satellites near me using a different algorithm with different parameters, and our satellites may have different reactions to a close approach. How do we deal with that? That is one of the big policy questions that we're starting to try and grapple with when it comes to, we talked about the traffic management problem we talked about earlier. And
how do you get, so I mean, it's hard for governments to agree on anything. How you, that's the $1 billion question.
The issue here is you mentioned governments, plural, right? We could be operating under the jurisdiction of 2 different countries. So it's not just getting the United States to put this kind of a framework in place or figure out the rules of the road. We have to get a whole bunch of countries to agree on that, because the way the current legal framework works, each country is responsible for their own space activities, including their own country or companies. So that's a whole other added layer of complexity on top of things.
So going from black sky to blue sky, Steve, from your perch, because you're sort of seeing an overview of what's going on, where do you see opportunities to leverage AI in space, perhaps that haven't been mentioned yet?
Yeah, you know, for the U.S. space program, AI isn't actually something that's new. In fact, when we've been sending rovers to the surface of Mars, we've been using AI to be able to travel because of the great distances, and you can't have an operator real time telling it where to go. But now we're building satellites that are much smaller, and we have algorithms that are much more sophisticated and processing that's much deeper. So instead of having dumb satellites that are taking terabytes of data and just dumping it everywhere, hard for any operator to see, we now have satellites that are not just taking pictures of the ocean, but you could tell the satellite what to look for. It'll look for cruise ships, and it will say, oh, there's a cruise ship, I'll take pictures of those. You could also have almost like HAL 9000 in the movie 2001 Space Odyssey. You could have satellites that now could say, I don't feel well. Something's about to break, something isn't right. To Brian's point, you could have satellites that are saying, hey, these satellites are getting too close to me, I better move away from that. And you could have, using AI, the ability to move around space, to do rendezvous and docking and interacting with satellites in sort of a local community. These are really very transformative capabilities, and all the more so, as Brian's pointing out, with so many satellites up there, to have, I won't quite say sentient satellites, but that's where they're going, these sort of really brilliant satellites that are going to be incredibly capable.
Yeah, it almost sounds like you need a machine mind to be able to navigate all of it's going to be millions of different parts up there.
And just to add a layer of complexity, this is all happening at 7 to 10 kilometers a second and at distances of thousands of kilometers from each other and hundreds of kilometers away from the Earth, right? So it is, you think about the autonomous nature you need for, like, let's say, autonomous vehicles, and then just, they're moving at 7 kilometers a second now. That adds a whole other layer of complexity.
And then you also have ways to manage propulsion. Can you use AI to develop new propulsion systems and new ways to live and work in space? And monitor health and things like that?
I think one of the future applications of AI that we've not talked about is, as you're raising here, is on the design and development and R&D side. And I think we're going to find AI as a really powerful tool to help scientists and engineers do exactly that, to speed up the rate at which you test different chemicals and lay out different test plans. I think AI is going to become a really powerful tool for engineers that accelerates their workload and allows one engineer to do the work in the future of 5 engineers today. I don't think the engineers are going to be taken out of that loop, but I think it's going to be a really powerful enabler.
Absolutely.
And how are we going to grow and strengthen the space workforce? Just keep up with initiatives and letting people know that.
Yeah, I think this is a really big deal because, the industry is growing leaps and bounds. It's really exciting. Even with the economy cooling, space is still growing double digits. But the workforce is not keeping pace with it. So, one of the big efforts is to try to expand it, to make it available to scientists, engineers, as we've talked earlier, even artists, to get them on board, because they bring, again, a lot of imagination. We actually hire people from the entertainment industry because, again, they bring a background of seeing things very differently than maybe a traditional view on things. So the question is, how do we bring in that greater diversity, women, people of color, go to schools that have been underserved in the past? The industry, we've helped to work on something called Space Workforce 2030. It's 30 companies that have actually come together to try to actually help at the K through 12 university level and to share best practices with each other and hold ourselves accountable for improving that workforce. So instead of competing for talent, we're growing talent.
Okay, that sounds great.
And just to add on to that, yes, we need a lot of STEM, traditional STEM engineering, science, and space world, but not just that. That is one of the other big changes that's happened in the last several decades is we need a lot different types of backgrounds and jobs in the space world than people normally think of, person in a lab coat who's doing literal rocket science. Yes, we need those, but we need a lot more. We need policy wonks, we need lawyers. There's a whole huge room for business development, marketing, communications. The space career field is much, much bigger than just scientists, engineers, and astronauts.
Okay. We have 2 minutes left, and Aerospace has a tradition of lightning rounds at the end of their panels. So I'm going to do that now.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Okay.
Are you set? Okay. First off, an emerging technology or capability that will be most transformative for space.
I'll go first. If I say AI, I'll get that's the obvious one. But the one actually I'm excited about is nuclear propulsion. I actually think that'll be very transformative in what we can do in space.
Okay, cool.
Seconded.
Okay, everyone's nuclear.
I'm also, no,
Everyone went nuclear.
I think that's great. I'm also interested, maybe connected to that, in-space power and power beaming and what you can do with massive amounts of power in space.
Biggest risk or challenge that we will face?
The lack of coordination between all these different actors and activities, and if somebody screws something, if you have a car wreck in space, you don't just tow it to the side of the road. That stuff is going to be up there for years, maybe decades, depending on where it is. That is a huge challenge.
If given the opportunity, would you rather visit the moon or Mars?
Mars.
Yeah?
I'm neither. They're both pretty harsh, pretty cold. I'm getting old. I'll let my kids do that.
I'll go to the moon first.
I think moon you can sort of, it's more bouncy.
Yeah, that's
I think it would be fun.
Too dusty.
It's also a few days journey versus
exactly.
2 to 3 years, right?
I have a long-term commitment problem.
And last, and I think this is probably the most important question of all, Barbie or Oppenheimer?
I'm scared if I say the wrong thing, the audience might, but Oppenheimer, come on.
What, yeah?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
No Barbies among you?
I saw them both. I would go with Barbie.
I live in New Mexico. If I say anything other than Oppenheimer, I cannot go home.
I'm going to break ranks here. I like Jules, which is about an alien who lands in with a bunch of older people who take him in. So I'm going with the alien.
Okay.
Anyway, that is it. Thank you so much for coming early. I appreciate it. And please stick around. We've got this Space Domain Awareness Challenge next, and hours and hours and hours of more space programming. So stick around. Thank you.